Humanity had been forgotten. The Conclave, a coalition of advanced alien races, saw Earth and its colonies as little more than a curiosity, an unimportant speck in the grand scale of the galaxy. For centuries, the human race had been left to fend for itself, struggling under the heel of galactic powers that treated them as nothing more than an afterthought. Earth's governments had pleaded for help, offered alliances, and even surrendered technology in hopes of securing some measure of protection. But the Conclave had only offered disdain. They gave humanity nothing. No advanced weapons, no starships to defend against the growing threats in the galaxy, no resources to rebuild their dying ecosystems, and in return, humanity had been forced to make do with what little they had. It was a cold and unforgiving world, and the people of Earth could feel the weight of their isolation every day. But in the darkness, something stirred. Something within humanity refused to stay silent. It wasn't a desire for revenge, nor was it an act of pure defiance. No, it was something deeper, a need to prove themselves, to show that the humans of Earth were more than just the sum of their limitations. They were capable of greatness, even when denied the tools of the stars. Deep in a hidden facility beneath the surface of Earth, a small but dedicated group of scientists, engineers, and former military personnel were working tirelessly on a project that could turn everything around. They didn't have access to the best resources or the most advanced technology. What they had were their minds, their skills, and an unwavering resolve to create something that would change the course of human history. They called themselves the Steel Dawn, a name that reflected their belief in a new beginning for humanity. Their mission was simple: to craft a warship that would rival the might of the Conclave. It would be the most powerful weapon ever built by human hands, a symbol of their resilience and determination. But the odds were against them. The Conclave's forces controlled most of the galaxy's resources, leaving Earth with scraps and old tech to work with. And worse yet, Earth itself was under constant surveillance. Every move they made was watched, and they had to be careful. They started small, scavenging any piece of alien technology they could find. Some of it was broken, old, or useless, but some of it was brilliant. They reverse-engineered what they could, creating makeshift components for their new ship. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't as sleek or advanced as the warships of the Conclave. But it was theirs, built with grit, determination, and the belief that they had something to prove. Each day, the facility expanded, hidden beneath layers of rock, far from prying eyes. The warship took shape. The design was revolutionary. Human ingenuity was pushed to its limits, combining alien technology with human creativity to build a vessel that could withstand the harshest conditions and dish out destruction with unmatched force. Though the project was still in its infancy, the team saw potential. They knew that if they could finish this ship, it would be humanity's weapon of hope. A chance to show the galaxy that they were not to be ignored, that their defiance was stronger than any alien empire's expectations. It wouldn't be long before the Conclave realized that they had made a grave mistake. And so, the humans of Earth began to build, not just a warship, but a legend. The facility under Earth's surface was alive with activity. It was a place of constant motion, the air thick with the scent of oil, metal, and the hum of machinery. Every corner of the underground base was dedicated to a single purpose: building the warship that would give humanity a fighting chance. The team was small, but their resolve was unshakable. They were working against the clock. Time was not on their side, and every minute spent in secrecy was one more minute the Conclave might discover their project. The warship, now taking shape in a cavernous hangar, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its design was crude in some ways, rough edges and heavy armor plating, but there was beauty in its sheer power. It was an amalgamation of scavenged alien technology, human ingenuity, and sheer determination. The heart of the ship was a unique energy core, a combination of both human and alien components, capable of fueling weapons far more devastating than anything the Conclave had ever encountered. The engineers and scientists were making progress, though the challenges were immense. Every time they thought they were close to perfection, another problem would arise. Sometimes the ship's weapon systems would overload. Other times, the engines would sputter, unable to reach the speeds they needed. But each failure taught them something valuable. They adapted, they innovated, and they kept pushing forward. They were building a ship not just for war, but for survival. Outside the facility, the world continued to suffer under the yoke of the Conclave's oppression. Earth's economy was in shambles, and its population struggled with dwindling resources. But in the underground facility, there was a glimmer of hope. The team worked day and night, testing systems, calibrating weapons, and reinforcing the ship's hull. They couldn't afford to waste time. Then, the ship's first successful test of its primary weapon system sent shockwaves through the base. The ground trembled as the ship's energy cannons unleashed their first blast, vaporizing a nearby test target in an instant. The weapon's power was staggering, a result of months of work to combine human and alien technology. The team stood in stunned silence for a moment, knowing that they had just taken their first step towards something monumental. The warship could become a reality, a weapon capable of standing up to the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. But they still had a long way to go. The ship was far from ready for battle. Its hull needed more reinforcement, and its stealth systems were still in the early stages. The ship's AI, still learning from the engineers' input, wasn't fully operational yet, but it was beginning to show signs of brilliance. With the right tweaks, it could be the tactical mastermind the crew needed. The team knew it had the potential to change everything. But they had to finish it, and they had to do it before the Conclave discovered their work. Then came the day when a breakthrough happened. A brilliant young engineer named Mira made a discovery that would change the ship's fate. While analyzing the energy output from the alien technology they had scavenged, she realized that there was a way to amplify the ship's power without overloading its systems. It was risky, but if they could pull it off, the warship would be more than just a weapon. It would be a beacon of humanity's defiance. With renewed energy, the team threw everything they had into this new idea. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the ship was slowly transforming into a behemoth that would strike fear into any who dared to challenge it. They were no longer just building a warship. They were building a legacy, one that would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. The warship, now fully operational in its prototype form, loomed like a dark titan in the depths of Earth's underground base. The engineers and scientists had done it. They had created a vessel capable of unimaginable destruction, and with each passing day, it became more powerful. But the crew knew that all their work meant nothing if they couldn't test it in the real world. They were ready for their first real battle. It was only a matter of time before the Conclave would notice the anomalies. The ship's power output, its energy signatures, and the strange fluctuations in Earth's atmosphere hadn't gone unnoticed by the advanced surveillance systems the Conclave had in place. They had been watching. They knew something was wrong, and they were coming. But humanity had no choice but to act. The Steel Dawn, the small group of humans fighting back against the oppressive alien powers, decided to strike first. They would use the warship to demonstrate what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The first target was a small Conclave scout ship, a lone vessel on the edge of Earth's orbit. It wasn't much, but it was a perfect test subject. The Resistance launched the warship, still in its early form, and ascended into the void. The team's hearts pounded with anticipation. This was no longer theoretical. This was war. As the warship rose from the depths of Earth's atmosphere, the crew marveled at its sheer size. It felt unstoppable, an embodiment of everything they had worked for. The massive ship moved like a phantom, cloaked in darkness, slipping past the sensors of the scout ship. For a moment, the Conclave's vessel had no idea what was coming. Then, in an instant, the warship unleashed its first salvo. Energy cannons that had only been tested in controlled environments now burned through the cold vacuum of space, sending bolts of pure destruction toward the scout ship. The Conclave ship didn't stand a chance. Its shields flickered for a brief second before failing entirely, and within moments, it was torn apart by the barrage of energy. The humans watched in stunned silence. The sheer force of their weapon was unlike anything they'd ever imagined. For a brief moment, they felt invincible. The Conclave would know that humanity had teeth now. They would never again see humans as helpless and weak. But the victory came with a price. The blast had caught the attention of a much larger Conclave fleet, still several light years away, but on their way. They wouldn't be able to hide their weapon forever. The Steel Dawn had only bought them time. The scout ship's destruction would not go unnoticed, and the Conclave would send everything they had to put an end to humanity's defiance. As the warship returned to Earth's atmosphere, the crew knew that this was just the beginning. They had proven their ship could be deadly. They had demonstrated humanity's ability to fight back. But now, the real test was coming. The Conclave would retaliate, and the humans would have to face their might head-on. Back in the underground base, the engineers scrambled to make improvements to the warship. Its energy systems were stable, but they would need to be reinforced. The ship's shields, though effective against smaller targets, were no match for larger fleets. Time was running out, and they knew the Conclave's fleet wouldn't be far behind. Humanity had taken its first taste of war, but this was only the beginning. The victory over the Conclave's scout ship was short-lived. The warship had proven itself capable of incredible destruction, but the crew knew the real challenge was coming. The initial strike had drawn the attention of the Conclave, and they would not take humanity's defiance lightly. The humans had proven their resolve, but now they had to prepare for the full wrath of the Conclave's fleets. The engineers worked around the clock to enhance the warship. They knew the ship was powerful, but the Conclave's fleets were vast, and their technology far more advanced. Time was their greatest enemy, and every second mattered. While the ship's energy cannons had shown incredible promise, they needed to be upgraded to deal with larger, more heavily armed targets. The warship's armor had held up against the scout ship's weapons, but there were concerns about whether it could withstand an entire fleet. Stealth systems were also high on the priority list. Hiding their weapon from enemy detection had worked once, but it wouldn't fool the Conclave twice. Weeks passed as the warship underwent intense modifications. When the final phase of upgrades was complete, the ship was far more formidable than before. The crew knew the warship still wasn't perfect, but they had no choice. The Conclave would soon be upon them. The first sign that things were about to escalate came with the arrival of a massive Conclave fleet, its ships massive and menacing, emerging from deep space. It was a force meant to intimidate, to crush any resistance with overwhelming firepower. The Conclave had been monitoring Earth's energy signatures closely, and they were finally moving to wipe out humanity's rebellion. The humans had no illusions about what was coming. The Conclave wanted to make an example of Earth. The Steel Dawn knew they had only one chance. If they didn't strike first, they would be wiped out before they had a chance to retaliate. The warship launched into the stars once again, but this time, it wasn't a single scout ship they were facing. It was an entire armada. The crew gathered in the command center, their hearts pounding as the vast alien fleet appeared on their radar. As the warship approached the Conclave fleet, its weapons powered up. The sheer scale of the confrontation was overwhelming, but the crew's determination never wavered. This was humanity's moment to prove they were not weak, not insignificant. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their place in the galaxy. The first barrage from the warship's energy cannons tore through the incoming alien ships. The blast was enough to disable several smaller Conclave vessels in one shot, sending them spiraling into space. The humans felt the adrenaline rush as their ship unleashed its full firepower, but the battle was far from over. The Conclave's ships retaliated with powerful beams of energy, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space. For a moment, it looked as though the humans were outmatched, but the warship's agility and stealth systems allowed it to avoid most of the incoming fire, and the humans countered with devastating precision. The battle raged on, with the human warship outmaneuvering the Conclave's larger ships. The energy cannons fired relentlessly, breaking through shields and tearing apart enemy vessels. The Conclave fleet, despite its superior numbers, was unprepared for the sheer force of the warship and the ingenuity of the humans piloting it. The humans had taken the Conclave by surprise, and for the first time, the alien fleet found itself struggling to cope with a force they had never anticipated. When the final alien vessel was destroyed, the warship hovered in the cold silence of space. The humans had done it. They had struck back, and they had won. But the cost of victory was evident. The warship was damaged, and the crew was exhausted. This was only the beginning, and the Conclave would not rest until they had destroyed humanity's rebellion. But for now, the humans had made their mark on the galaxy. The victory over the Conclave fleet was a bittersweet one. Humanity had delivered a powerful blow, but the cost of battle was apparent. The warship had sustained significant damage, and while the crew had managed to outmaneuver and destroy a number of alien vessels, they knew the Conclave would not let their defeat go unpunished. The humans had proven their power, but now the galaxy's most formidable force was coming for them in full force. Back on Earth, the engineers worked tirelessly to repair the warship. Every available resource was diverted to getting the ship ready for the coming storm. The warship's hull was reinforced, its weapons recalibrated, and its stealth systems fine-tuned. They had to ensure that it was in peak condition before facing the Conclave's retaliation. Yet, no matter how fast they worked, time was always against them. The Conclave wasn't a species that forgave such humiliations. They had always viewed humanity as little more than an afterthought, but that perception had changed. The humans had proven themselves a threat, and the Conclave was determined to crush them before their influence could spread. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. It was about sending a message to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity's rise couldn't be allowed to continue. A massive Conclave fleet, much larger than the previous one, was already on its way. The fleet was made up of the Conclave's most powerful warships, equipped with advanced weaponry and technologies far beyond what the humans had ever seen. The warship that had previously struck fear into the Conclave's heart would now face its greatest challenge. As the warship prepared for its next mission, the crew knew what was at stake. This time, it wouldn't be a surprise attack or a quick victory. The warship would have to fight its way through the most formidable fleet in the galaxy. The odds were stacked against them, but they had no choice but to stand their ground. The humans couldn't afford to lose. Earth couldn't afford to fall. The first sighting of the Conclave Armada was enough to make even the most battle-hardened members of the crew pause. The vastness of the fleet was overwhelming. An ocean of alien ships, all heading toward Earth. The warship, still scared from the earlier battle, rose once again into the stars, the crew standing ready for whatever came next. The battle began almost immediately. The Conclave ships, with their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, began to fire upon the warship as soon as they saw it. Energy beams and missiles rained down from every direction, hitting the warship with the force of a meteor strike. The human vessel rocked under the barrage, but its reinforced hull held firm. The warship's energy cannons fired back, slicing through the enemy's shields and tearing apart their vessels one by one. But for every ship they destroyed, two more took its place. The crew worked frantically to keep up, coordinating their fire and using the warship's advanced maneuvering capabilities to avoid being caught in the heavy crossfire. Despite their efforts, the battle seemed endless. The Conclave's armada was relentless, their weapons hitting harder with each passing moment. Inside the warship's command center, the crew knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The warship's energy levels were dropping fast, but they couldn't stop. If they lost now, Earth would be destroyed, and humanity would be wiped out forever. They had one last weapon in their arsenal, the ship's ultimate cannon, a weapon that, if it worked, could turn the tide of the battle. But it was untested and could drain all their remaining power. The crew exchanged determined glances, They had nothing left to lose. The warship shook violently as another barrage of conclave fire pounded its shields. The crew could feel the tension mounting, and the atmosphere in the command center was thick with anticipation. The conclave fleet loomed in the distance, their weapons firing relentlessly, pushing the warship to its limits. Energy levels were low, the shields flickering dangerously with each impact. Time was running out. Inside the warship, Commander Rhea stared out at the approaching fleet, her mind racing. There was no way they could sustain this battle much longer. The warship had taken more hits than anyone could have expected, and even with all their ingenuity, the crew could feel the strain on the systems. But there was no option but to keep fighting. Earth's survival rested on their shoulders, and they couldn't afford to fail. "Reinforce the forward shields," Rhea commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. "Fire all remaining energy at their lead ship. Give them everything we've got." Her crew responded immediately, every hand moving with practiced efficiency. The warship's energy systems had already been pushed past their breaking point, but they were running out of time to make a difference. The crew knew they had one final weapon, the ultimate cannon. It was still experimental, still untested in actual combat, but if it worked, it could destroy the entire conclave fleet in one shot. The problem was that firing it would drain the warship's energy reserves completely, leaving them vulnerable to any remaining attacks. "Target their command ship," Rhea ordered, her gaze narrowing. "We hit them there, and we cripple their fleet." Her voice was cold, calculated. She had to believe in their plan. The warship aimed its massive cannons at the conclave flagship, its energy stores nearly depleted. The conclave ships continued to fire, their weapons smashing against the warship's weakened shields, but the human vessel pressed forward, determined to land a decisive blow. "Firing in 3, 2, 1, the ship's eye called out. The command center went silent as the ultimate cannon powered up. A low hum filled the air as the massive weapon charged, its energy slowly gathering for the devastating blast. In the moment before it fired, Rhea felt a rush of emotion, fear, anticipation, but above all, resolve. She had seen the cost of this battle, the lives that had already been lost. This one final attack would be humanity's last chance to prove their place in the galaxy. The cannon fired. A brilliant beam of energy shot forward, brighter than 1,000 suns, cutting through the void of space toward the conclave flagship. The beam was unlike anything the conclave had ever seen, tearing through the flagship's shields like paper and slamming into the heart of its core. The resulting explosion was colossal. Flames and debris scattered in every direction as the flagship disintegrated before the crew's eyes. The blast rippled through the rest of the fleet, creating shockwaves that knocked the surrounding ships off course. The humans had struck a devastating blow, but the cost was evident. The energy readings across the warship dropped to critical levels. Every system was failing. The ultimate cannon had drained the last reserves of power, and the warship was now powerless, adrift in space. "Shields down," an officer reported, voice trembling. "Engines offline. We're sitting ducks." Rhea's heart raced. The battle wasn't over yet. The remaining conclave ships were regrouping, but they were not retreating. The warship had delivered a death blow to their flagship, but now it had no power to defend itself. They had made their stand, but would it be enough to win the war? "All hands, brace for impact," Rhea said, steeling herself for what was coming next. "Prepare for the final strike." The warship was vulnerable, and the crew knew the conclave wouldn't hesitate to finish them off. But humanity had fought with everything they had, and even with their backs against the wall, they weren't ready to surrender. The warship drifted in the silence of space, powerless and exposed, as the remnants of the conclave fleet regrouped. The last shot had dealt a crippling blow to their flagship, but the remaining ships, though shaken, were still a formidable force. Humanity's hope now rested in the fact that they had left the conclave with a wounded pride, and that pride could be their greatest weapon. The crew of the warship was battered, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse, but they refused to give up. They knew what was at stake: Earth's survival, humanity's place in the galaxy. It all hung in the balance. Commander Rhea stood at the front of the command center, watching the flickering lights of the warship's damaged systems. Her heart pounded, each beat a reminder of the perilous situation they were in. "How much longer until we can restore power?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Not long," replied Mira, the young engineer who had been working non-stop since the battle began. "But it's going to take every bit of energy we have left just to get the engines running again." The core's still cooling down from the last shot. Rhea nodded. "We don't need the engines. We just need to get the weapons back online. If we can disable one more ship, we can send a message the Conclave won't ignore." The tension in the room was palpable. The warship was barely holding together, and the crew had no way of knowing how long they could keep fighting. The Conclave fleet was now closing in, their weapons charging, preparing for one final assault. But Rhea knew they had one advantage: the element of surprise. The Conclave, for all their power, had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. They had assumed that once the warship was disabled, the humans would be helpless. But that assumption had already cost them dearly. The crew of the warship wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Is the cloaking system still operational?" Rhea asked, her mind working quickly. Mira hesitated for only a second before answering. "It's functional, but not at full capacity. We could hide from their sensors for a short time, but it won't last long." "Good enough," Rhea said, her eyes locking onto the display screen. "Prepare to engage stealth. We'll get in close and hit them with everything we have left." The crew sprang into action, each person focused on their task. The warship's cloaking system hummed to life, and the massive vessel faded into the void, invisible to the Conclave's advanced sensors. The remaining Conclave ships were still coordinating their assault, unaware that their enemy had vanished. The human crew moved quickly, operating with a quiet urgency. Mira worked to redirect what little power was left to the warship's weapon systems. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would strike at the heart of the Conclave's remaining fleet, using everything they had left to disable one ship, just one, and send a message loud and clear to the galaxy. "Locked onto the lead vessel," said the weapons officer, his voice calm but tense. "Firing in 5, 4, 3, 2. Rhea's finger hovered over the command button. She could feel the weight of every second, the finality of the moment. The warship was an embodiment of humanity's fight for survival. If this failed, there would be no second chance. Fire. The ship's remaining weapons roared to life, and the energy blasts surged forward, invisible but powerful. In an instant, the lead Conclave ship was caught off guard. Its shields were overwhelmed by the blast, and the ship's core detonated in a brilliant explosion. The shockwave reverberated through space, shaking the remaining Conclave vessels, and throwing their attack plans into chaos. For a moment, the warship's crew dared to hope. The fleet had lost its leader. The remaining ships faltered, their commander scrambling to respond to the unexpected blow. But Rhea knew it wasn't over. The Conclave would retaliate. They would come for Earth, for humanity. This victory was temporary, but it was enough to give them hope. "All systems offline," Mira reported breathlessly. "We've drained everything we have." "Prepare for the end," Rhea said quietly, her voice resolute, but not without a fight. The warship was dead in space, its systems drained and its engines useless. The remaining Conclave ships, though shaken by the loss of their flagship, were regrouping. Their commanders were furious, but there was no time for hesitation. The Conclave would not let this act of rebellion stand. They would burn Earth to the ground if necessary. But the humans aboard the warship refused to surrender. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to give up now. Their vessel may have been disabled, but their will to survive burned brighter than ever. Commander Rhea stood in the command center, watching the Conclave fleet close in. The ship's energy levels were practically non-existent, and their weapons were all but useless. They were sitting ducks, vulnerable and exposed, and yet the thought of surrender was impossible. There had to be another way. "Can we get anything back online?" Rhea asked Mira, her voice quiet but urgent. The young engineer's hands flew across the control panel, trying to reroute power where she could. "I'm trying, Commander. If we had more time. But the Conclave is already moving in." The crew knew they were running out of time. The Conclave ships, massive and overwhelming, began to target the warship, their weapons charging for one final assault. The crew braced themselves, knowing that this would be their last stand. "Are we just going to let them destroy us?" Rhea asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Is this how it ends?" For a moment, the silence in the room was deafening. Then one of the officers spoke up, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "No, we're not done yet. We've come this far. We can still make them pay." Rhea turned, her eyes locking onto the officers. The determination in his voice ignited something in her. She knew what had to be done. "Activate the self-destruct sequence," she said, her voice firm. The room went still. The crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. "Commander, we can't," Mira began, but Rhea held up a hand, cutting her off. "If we can't fight back, we'll make sure the Conclave understands that we will never give up," Rhea said, her voice filled with conviction. "This ship has been our symbol of defiance. Let's turn it into their nightmare." A few moments of tense silence passed before Mira nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Understood, Commander. Engaging the self-destruct now." The countdown began. As the sequence activated, Rhea stood tall, watching as the last chance for survival slipped through their fingers. She thought of Earth, of the people they were fighting to protect, and of the legacy humanity would leave behind. They may have been pushed to the brink, but they had fought with everything they had. The Conclave ships, unaware of what was about to happen, continued to close in. But the warship was ready to deliver its final blow. Its core began to glow with an intense light, as though it were about to unleash a force unlike anything the Conclave had ever encountered. 10 seconds, Mira said, her voice tight with tension. Rhea took one last look at her crew. They had stood together against impossible odds, and they had given it everything they had. Their sacrifice would not be in vain. 5, 4, 3. The Conclave fleet was almost upon them now. Rhea's mind raced, knowing that this final act would change everything. 1. The warship erupted in an explosion that sent shockwaves rippling across the stars, a brilliant flash of light that consumed the Conclave ships in its wake. The blast obliterated the warship and the remaining enemy vessels in one colossal burst of energy. In that moment, the universe knew humanity's name. When the light finally faded, space was still. The Conclave's fleet was no more, wiped out in an instant. The human warship, though gone, had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. The message was clear. Humanity would not be silenced. Though Earth had lost its greatest weapon, the fire of resistance had sparked something far more powerful, the unwavering resolve of a people who refused to be conquered. Humanity's future was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again.